Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite bands ever, Metallica, and specifically the similarities between three of their albums, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. So ever since I've been a Metallica fan, basically right when I was getting into them, I noticed that their second, third, and fourth albums, which are the three albums I just mentioned, have kind of similar track lists in the sense that the types of songs and the characteristics of the songs in certain places. So this has always interested me, and I just wanted to break down the similarities because I'd always thought about it, but I never verbalized it. And so I have four song types that I'm going to be breaking down. So here we go. Let's start with the first one, the opening tracks of each of the albums. So the opening tracks of these three albums all have some pretty big similarities in my opinion. The first being the intro. So all three of these songs have an instrumental intro unrelated to the rest of the song. Like a short little musical interlude and then the full song comes on. So Ride the Lightning's opener, Fight Fire with Fire, starts with this acoustic guitar piece. Master of Puppets' opening track, Battery, starts with an acoustic guitar intro which eventually builds into full band with distorted guitars. And finally, Blackened, the opening track for And Justice for All, has probably the weirdest out of all three of these intros. Unlike the first two, it doesn't start with an acoustic guitar, but rather a bunch of distorted harmonizing guitars that are actually reversed. Now that I'm done talking about the intros for the opening tracks, I'm going to talk about the general character of the song. So all three of these tracks are really aggressive, straight-ahead thrash metal songs. And I'm guessing if you're watching this video about Metallica, you know what thrash metal is, but if not, it's just metal music that basically was fused with hardcore punk, so it's aggressive and really fast. So I'm going to play the riffs for all three of these. First, Fight Fire with Fire. Once the intro fades out, this is the riff. Next up, the riff for Battery, which again comes in after the intro. Hey guys, Will Editing here. I forgot to introduce Blackened, so this next riff is Blackened. So yeah, all three of these riffs are just to show that these songs have pretty similar tempos and are similarly aggressive and thrashy. So those are the two largest similarities of the opening tracks of these three albums. These aren't super specific details, but I think that's good because it still gives room for each of the songs to have their own identities. If Metallica was doing this intentionally, which I feel like they probably were, they were doing this because they knew that a certain general idea worked for the album or for what that song's supposed to do for the album. So like having a short little intro to start off the album and then lead into the riff, and then open the album with a really energetic song that their fans will love because that was kind of Metallica's bread and butter. They're a thrash metal band, that's what their fans likely loved, and it was just great to start off the album with something that they're great at. It's their sound, it's what they're known for, and I think that they kind of give themselves a shell and work within that and do cool stuff with that. So next, I'm going to be talking about the title tracks of these albums. So the title tracks of these albums, which are just titled after the album, so Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All, are all the second track of their respective albums and are much longer, more complicated, multi-part pieces than the openers. So starting off, Ride the Lightning, which is probably the least complicated out of the three, but it's still multi-part. So the first section is built around this riff. There's singing over it. It's pretty typical. But then there's this middle section that's just built around a big guitar solo. After this whole big guitar solo section, it goes back to the main riff. And then goes back into vocals, and the song kind of continues. So Master of Puppets actually has a pretty similar form to Ride the Lightning. Like Ride the Lightning, it goes through regular song form, regular for Metallica, that is, but they're singing over it, there's a chorus, there are verses, a bunch of riffs, everything. But then it goes into an instrumental middle section, just like Ride the Lightning. So the difference is this instrumental section is not just a big giant guitar solo, it's like a complete departure. And then it goes into a guitar solo, and then builds up, and then goes into another guitar solo, and then finally returns to the song form. But yeah, like the Ride the Lightning, after the instrumental middle section, it goes back to the regular song form with the riff and the singing and all that. And finally, And Justice for All, which has a different song form from the other two. It doesn't really have the main riff, middle section, and then main riff. It actually starts with this nice little clean intro, and then it builds up and then goes into the main riff. And so after that riff, it then goes into a guitar solo, and then it does this transition back into the intro, sort of, but this time it's more distorted. The point is that it's a long and complicated form with multiple sections and going back and forth. just like the other two songs. So overall, these title tracks are some of the most ambitious on the album. They're adventurous, and often it pays off. In my opinion, these are three of Metallica's best songs. And so I think it's cool that the first songs are kind of, as I've said, meat and potatoes, basic Metallica stuff. Not basic in a bad way, but just what they're really good at. And then it goes from that, like what you're expecting, to the second song, which is Metallica going off in different directions, trying some new stuff. So you're kind of locked in with the intro, and then from there you're ready to explore. And I think that's what Metallica does with having the second song, the title track, be multi-part, explore something a little different. And I also think it's notable that these are the title tracks, because anything being the title track is a statement that this is what the album is about. So if the title track of the album is, the coolest song or the most adventurous song, the most ambitious, I feel like that's fitting because it needs to live up to the name of the album. And I do think these songs do that. Next up, I'm going to be talking about the ballads on these albums. So what I'm calling the ballads on these albums, even a Metallica ballad is going to be heavy, obviously. So the songs I'm talking about are Fade to Black, Welcome Home Sanitarium, and One. These are all, again, the same track placement on each album, track 4. What characterizes these songs are that these are all sadder songs, and they actually have pretty similar forms, I've found. So they start off with a clean or acoustic riff, just something pretty beautiful, more calm. The verses for all three of these songs are soft themselves, but then they go into a heavier section, whether it's a chorus or just some riff break that it goes into and then goes back into the verses. But then it goes into a whole second section, which is just all heavy. So it just kind of builds up to that. So to start, Fade to Black, the song form repeats a couple of times between the and the, and then it finally goes into the thing I was talking about, the second half that's heavier. So this new riff comes in, the and that whole new riff is kind of the heavy second half of this specific song. And then it does go into a long guitar solo outro, but essentially it is starting off soft and then a little bit of alternation between soft and heavy, and then finally just a heavy final section. And so now I'm going to talk about Welcome Home Sanitarium. The main riff for Sanitarium is this. And that's the verse riff, but then the heavy part that it interchanges between, in this case, is the chorus. Then from that heavy chorus riff, again, it goes back to the verse, and then the chorus. And then from there, from the final chorus, it goes into the second half, which is the heavy section. So once again, it's the same form, essentially, as Fade to Black, in basic terms at least. And like Fade to Black, in this second section, there is a guitar solo, but the song doesn't end on it, unlike Fade to Black, because in Fade to Black, it just fades out on that awesome guitar solo. But in Sanitarium, it doesn't do that. It just ends on a big that thing, which is a cool ending, but that is a difference between the two, even though the forms are mostly similar. And so the final ballad, One, has a bunch of awesome clean riffs. Like Sanitarium and Fade to Black, the clean verses do have a little bit of distorted guitar in between them. It's sort of a chorus in this song, but it's not as long. It's pretty small, and it's more of a transition between the and the. So this riff, you've definitely heard it. It does have the alternation between the heavy and the clean in the verses, but the heavy is not as much of an emphasis in the first part of One. But just like Sanitarium and Fade to Black, it does have a second section which is heavy, and it is super heavy. It goes into a sick riff, which is... And then again, just like the other two songs, there's a sick solo during the heavy section. And then after that, it does this harmony guitar thing, the... And then it just ends straight up on the riff. It ends. Once again, the basic idea is there between these three songs. And even though the forms are probably the most similar between this type of song in the three albums, while the other two have more general similarities, I still think it's not so similar that it takes away from how unique each song is, because every one of these songs is great in a different way, and I just think it's Metallica using what they know works as a jumping off point to create a great song. So the final thing I'm going to be talking about are going to be the instrumental tracks towards the end of the albums. All three of these albums each have an instrumental track, which, in order from Ride the Lightning to And Justice for All, are The Call of Cthulhu, Orion, and To Live Is to Die. And so, unlike the other tracks I've talked about, these do not all show up in the exact same place in the track list. If you're talking track number-wise, then The Call of Cthulhu and To Live Is to Die share that because they're both track 8, while Orion is track 7 on Master of Puppets. However, if you're talking about relative to the rest of the songs in the album, The Call of Cthulhu is the only one that's last on its album, while To Live Is to Die and Orion are second to last on each of their albums. And that's because Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets are both 8 tracks, while And Justice for All is 9 tracks, which is why there's a little bit of a discrepancy between where those songs are relatively and numerically on their albums. But basically, these are all just instrumental tracks. There's not a ton I can really say to compare between them besides the fact that they're instrumental, and I think that challenged Metallica to compose a little more creatively. You know, Kirk Hammett even said when he first did The Call of Cthulhu, he had never had to solo for so long, so he really had to think about what he's doing. Instead of just shredding right away, he had to play melodically, start a little slower, and he said that that was a good experience for him as a guitar player. And so I just think that Metallica having to compose instrumentally, it really created some of their best stuff. Like the whole Call of Cthulhu, all of the riffs are beautiful. And then, for example, in Orion, Cliff Burton, rest in peace, just goes crazy on the bass. It's his best bass showcase in all of Metallica's discography, maybe besides Anesthesia off of Kill 'Em All. And then To Live Is to Die is just a cool instrumental track. It's probably my least favorite out of 3. I don't know it as well as the other 2. But yeah, Metallica writing instrumentally, I think, just challenged them to do some of their best work in different ways depending on the album. So those are the similarities that I noticed in these Metallica albums. And before the video ends, I just want to quickly talk about why I think that these similarities only show up in these 3 albums. So Metallica's first album, Kill 'Em All, it's a great album. It's really cool, but I think that Metallica was still finding their sound. They were a little bit more derivative of their influences, not in a bad way, but like you can definitely hear what they were listening to at the time, and they were finding their sound a lot. James Hetfield's voice wasn't quite what it is now. The production value wasn't as high, and I do think that the rawness of that album is part of its appeal for me at least, but I do think that Metallica just had a collection of tracks they wrote. Also, Dave Mustaine was still in the band. They were in a different sort of stage. And once they put this album out, I think they started touring. They started figuring out their identity as a band. And from there, Ride the Lightning was the first time that this formula was kind of used, because that was the 80s Metallica formula when they really found themselves. And so I think that's why. And then after creating Ride the Lightning, they probably realized how great of an album that was and wanted to use some of the same basic structures, shells, ideas from that album and continue that and refine it in Master of Puppets, which a lot of Metallica fans, and including me probably, even though my opinion changes, would say that Master of Puppets is their best album. It's an improvement from Ride the Lightning, and it's arguably one of the best metal albums of all time, if not the best. So I think that Metallica really just took what they had. It was something special on Ride the Lightning, and they refined it and did a great job with it again on Master of Puppets. And then Cliff Burton sadly passed away, and then Metallica went back in the studio to work on And Justice for All. And from stories and interviews I've read, the recording process of And Justice for All, because they were all grieving, they were having some tension with Jason Newsted, the new bassist, because they missed Cliff, obviously, and he was a really important part of the band. And even though it's a great album still, and it has a lot of cool songs in it, I'd say it's probably the weakest out of these 3. Metallica, at that point, they'd been getting more proggy, which is just progressive, weird, with their music, and they'd gotten increasingly proggy, even from Kill 'Em All to Ride the Lightning, to Master of Puppets. The songs got more complicated, the structures got weirder, songs got longer, cooler composition, all that. And so they were pushing the progressive metal aspect as far as it could go on And Justice for All. The songs are all really long. You could argue it's a little bloated. And again, I'm not trying to hate on And Justice for All of you fans of that album. And so I think I read an interview with the band saying that they felt like they had pushed the complicated stuff as far as they could go with And Justice for All. And they'd pushed this formula as far as it could go with that, because logically the formula, as it went on from album to album, the songs got more complicated within that. Then from there, Metallica made the Black Album, which had a lot simpler songs, a lot more accessible stuff. What a lot of fans say was selling out, which I don't know how I feel about that. I think the Black Album's good. Not as good as their 80s stuff, but it's still good. But the point is, the Black Album does not have that formula at all in there, and I think it's because they kind of exhausted it with And Justice for All, and you know how much they pushed the limits of how weird and how complicated they could get with their music. And so yeah, that's the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you're not a Metallica fan, this video might not have made sense, but I recommend checking them out. If you are a Metallica fan, I hope you appreciate this. If you know of any more similarities that exist, let me know. I would love to hear them. I'm always interested in this kind of stuff. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you guys next time.